And you can all have your microphones on, so I guess it's nice to chit chat all together now.
Yes. Yeah. For me, something that I can recommend is that don't be afraid of being nervous. I mean, you will always, I'm always nervous. When I am going to be speaking, regardless of the audience, even if it's students or even if it's like a bunch of board of directors or CEOs, I'm always nervous. But I fake it, speaking of faking. So I fake that I am in control, I'm cool, everything is fine. The nervous is there, but the thing is about how you focus this nervous in like positive things that, you look that you're in control, I think.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And indeed, being nervous just means that you care, you care about delivering the quality that you intend to give. And that's a good thing too. And I do have, at the end of this presentation, I do have a few tips and tricks on how to cope with a little bit of stage fright. So we'll get back to that certainly, Miriam. Thanks for sharing. Irene, was there something you wanted to
can you
add?
hear me? I am having some problems again with my multiple devices.
We can hear you.
I think practicing. I really think that you hope you're going to be like a natural speaker and that like it comes to you, but I think that's the worst kind of advice when people say like it just comes naturally, go with the flow. Like I think you have to practice like a million times, and that will really help improve. So deliver your presentation as many times as you can before you have to actually do it in front of an audience.
All right.
That's definitely my advice. And if you record yourself doing it and have kind of like the stomach to watch yourself, which I think is very unpleasant, that can probably also, but it's hard.
Absolutely.
The recording you is hard to for me. Hearing my voice, ouch, is like the really I think like that is like ouch. But I think it's very important what you said, Irene, because you will see certain things or words that you repeat constantly and you don't realize until you hear yourself in a device.
Juan, was there anything you wanted to add to? A golden tip for anyone?
Who did you say, sorry?
Juan.
Is that me? Okay, Juan. Yes, because I also raised my hand, but I'm not in a hurry. Please, Juan.
Okay, yeah, sure. Happy to contribute. So I learned that speak slowly is great. I've practiced that a lot because when we're, as Miriam said, when we are nervous, we tend to speak very quickly. But the most important thing is that people understand what you're saying, right? Not only the words, but the intention as well. I did some acting and I learned a lot from that. So first, use words so people can understand the words and then the whole message and the cadence. How do you intonate, how you pronounce the words makes a lot of how they are perceived. Yeah.
Indeed, that's exactly what I was going to say, Juan. Just speak slowly because speaking fast, also people will think you're nervous, right? And I also try to remind myself to speak slowly because especially when I'm passionate about things, it's like a train, no? More and more.
Motorbike.
So you need to let the steam blow off a bit, right? And just take a breath. And a good thing for that is to actually breathe, right? It's really good. Good.
All right. That's awesome too. That's those are the handy tips, but it's the easiest tips that we find hardest to implement most of the time.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else who wants to share something?
I think Elias has a question, something to add. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it has happened that I've given the same presentation in different audiences, and sometimes it was successful, some others it was not successful, although I was saying the same things. And I think it's a lot driven by the energy that I feel, like how happy I feel at that moment. And I tend to use a lot my body language and even smile. And whenever I've been doing these things, I was always, I don't know, I was feeling closer to the audience, let's say, and the audience to me. So after the lecture, there was kind of like some interaction. And whenever my mind was very busy because it was kind of like multitasking with other pending issues, let's say, the message was not conveyed on the right way. So I tend to, some kind of like before the lecture, close my eyes, build some energy and then be there and release it.
Okay. So how do you do this? You dance or what?
No, it's more like to detach from all the other things that I have, focus and think of something happy. Happy could be, the chats that I could have with these people after the talk, or even the drinks I will have with them.
All right, awesome, Ilya. Thank you for sharing that too. Okay, so indeed, for me, that's important to understand that you have all done your part in public speaking and in pitching, and so I think it's always what you said, Ilya, is if you're telling the same story to a different audience, it might not connect that well, and it's important to consider always the idea of what's in it for me from the point of view from your audience. Of course, why are you telling them this? Why does it make sense for them to pay attention to your story? And I think this is quite important too, especially in this context, because what you're going to deliver is some kind of advocacy for Earth observation use cases, or trying to embed that in the current ecosystem. You're not selling a product. You're selling a technology. You're selling an enabler to something bigger, and it's important to consider why they should pay attention to what you're saying, and always project yourself in the shoes of your audience on that. So what I did do is I prepared a few slides just to get this conversation started with some tips and tricks that I learned from speaking over the past year. So I will be sharing this full screen. So if you do have something to say, then you need to be vocal about it, because if you just raise your hands in the Zoom meeting, I won't hear about it. Can I collapse? All right, so how to create impactful presentations, not only from the content, from the things that are on your slide, but also from the way that you bring it. And the first of all is indeed, why should you pitch? Why don't you just tell it in an email? Why don't you just deliver a short movie online and say, yeah, you can watch that? There's a reason why it makes sense to pitch something live to an audience, and that's something that you need to consider. Why am I doing this in this particular manner? Why am I standing in front of a crowd? It's maybe because you intend to create a spark of interest with all these people, and that helps if you can bring it in a live way rather than through an email. So that's always something that, why are you pitching, to consider. But also what I always like to keep in mind is whenever I pitch, I have some kind of call to action. What is the call to action after your speech? Do you want people to inquire more about Earth observation? Do you want people to connect with each other? Because you can be deliberate about what you want to achieve and what is your call to action at the end of the speech. So don't leave it hanging out there. Just say, this is what I want you to take away, or this is how I would like to spark your actions. And even by saying it, that helps people to nudge in that direction. So of course, on the one hand, public speaking or pitching is about storytelling, and storytelling is already a bifold word. On the one hand, it's about the story, getting the story right. What are the messages that you want to bring? And on the other hand, telling the story in a convincing way, being vocal with your body language, and how to deliver the message in the right way with what Juan said is the intonation, the cadence that you're using, and even the breaks that you put in between certain sentences. I learned from you a few golden tips that you have, and I shared some of mine. On the one hand, it makes sense to match an approach with your personal style. And for example, Ilya, if you like to be that happy presenter that creates enthusiasm with participants, then by all means go for that. If you need to be that person who is trusted as an expert, then you might need to reconsider how you present yourself. So try to match your approach with your personal style, because indeed, in the end, it will resonate better if you can be more at ease with who you are as a person. On the other hand, if you have been to these conferences, and I know you have all been, sometimes the whole day seems like all the same type of presentations, the same type of speakers. It can make sense to be a little bit more creative about it, and to do something while having the audience standing up, or having some kind of mini interaction during your session. These things help for people to remember that type of speech that you are bringing. Also, I really like to tell a story in a really visual way. Especially if you're speaking on a conference, if you're speaking on events that are really heavy on presentations, on content, it can be a lot easier for you yourself as well that you just go by a few key visuals, because in the end, you are already an expert about what you're trying to say. You don't need all these bullet points that are on the slide. You just need the image, and then you remember, oh yes, this is what I wanted to say about the drought problem in south of Spain, for example. And then you can tell the story about that case. You don't need all the bullets. Then I also like to specify the problem and specify the impact. So you can talk about a topic because you have a lot of passion about it and you have a lot of background information on that. But in the end, you need to be concise for the audience too. So why are you standing in front of them? It's to pinpoint the problem that they might have, to pinpoint the solution that you're presenting to them, and to show the impact it might bring for them. So that's something that that you need to be, that you need to prepare yourself quite good for. That you know what you're trying to say, and then you drill it down to one key message that sticks. So if they come back to you 1 week later, they say, oh yeah, she was that girl that said how the earth should be square because of better imagery, or whatever. I don't know what your key message might be, but think of something that will stick. And then these are some general observations that I do have. When I drill it down to 2 chapters in this presentation, on the one hand, I do have a lot of how to structure your story, structuring your pitch, and I also have something on how to build your slides, how to lay out them in the best way. So first of all, let's go to how to structure your pitch. And for this, I think quite an easy or straightforward narrative that I most of the time use whenever I deliberately prepare for a speech. It's these 6 steps. So on the one hand, I start with some kind of hook, and I'll come back to that in a few seconds. Then I deep dive immediately into the problem and why it needs improvement. So there you need to connect with your audience and try to make sure that you capture their problem in the right way, and to see whether it adheres to their context too. And this is something that you need to check sometimes beforehand or during the presentation to see whether people actually acknowledge that there's a problem and that there's a need for improvement. Because if you don't do that, all the other steps will be in vain. People will be missing out because they might say, this is not my cup of tea, this is not interesting for me. So try to validate that you have pinpointed the right problem. And that's also like a nice moment of interaction. For example, if you ask people to raise their hands or to applaud whenever they hear something that sticks to them, to their needs. Then you need to, of course, relieve the pain. Then you need to say, okay, thank God there is some kind of solution. There's an improvement. There's a technology enabler that we might have from Earth observation that might enable some of these or alleviate some of these issues. That's step number 3. And then you can say, okay, how far have we gotten with this technology already? This might be a good moment in time to showcase some cases or to talk about some cutting edge technology, some state-of-art research that you are aware of as an expert. This is for people to understand whether their specific use case might also be attractive to try to tackle with Earth observation. It helps for people to calibrate whether their needs are actually in line with what already can be done. Then you can move over to step number 5, because at that point in time, people should be interested in your solution and should be knowledgeable that their context matches with your solution. Then, of course, you need to talk numbers. You need to talk about what it might bring for them. In the bottom line, in our daily business, a lot boils down to whether it's financially attractive to do so. And I don't know whether you will all be able to deliver a really sharp story on this one, but there might be some cases where you can talk about the use case that you intend to change and how it might be delivering a more accurate measurement, how it might deliver a quicker assessment or a finer granularity of results and so forth. So this is the cost benefit. And then you can talk about next steps. You can talk about a call to action. You need to spark action with your audience. And by saying, and so if you want to get started, this is how you should do it. And these 6 steps are quite easy, depending on how much time you have in delivering such a speech. I might say that if you have 1 slide for each of these 6 steps, you might already be a good way into a 10 to 20 minute presentation. If you have more, then you can think of how to extend on the presentation by having some more cases or deep diving a little bit more in the technology, depending on the audience, of course. So then what I will do now, step by step, I will go through these 6 items. And the first of them is how to hook your audience. What is the most important moment in when you're speaking? It's the moment, especially on a conference, when you get on stage and people are intrigued by this new person. And then there's two ways forward. Either you hook people in the audience in the first minute or the first 2 minutes of your presentation. And if you don't, people will grab their smartphone, start checking their emails, phase out for the time being, because somehow they are already full of information and they don't seem to engage in what you have to offer. And this is also, or this is only based on this hook, this first start that you're having. Imagine that you're at a conference and sometimes you see people entering the stage and then they say, hi, my name is Stijn Smit. I'm an innovation consultant working at Verhaard. Today I will be talking about how to deliver a great pitch. And this is kind of silly because these first 5 sentences, this is something that you already saw on the slide in the background. This is something that you already know from the booklet of the program in the conference. So this is not delivering additional new information. So this is already creating a diminishing attention of your audience if you just introduce what people already know. So this is a bad way to get started. Another bad way to get started, and this is something that might happen maybe even more frequently, is people get on stage and they have a little mic check. Hello, check, check, check. Is this thing on? Yes, okay. So is this clicker working? Maybe let's experiment while you're on stage. So they're clicking. Okay. So how many times do I have left? 20 minutes? Yes. So And I see this happening quite a lot too. So this is a second way to get really off on the wrong foot. You should be aware that this clicker is working. You should be aware that you have 20 minutes to talk, and you should be aware that this microphone is working. This is what the organization is providing. So if these are your first sentences to get the audience's attention, then you're doing a bad job, because people see someone who's just juggling with the technology of being on stage, and it shows that you're insecure. So how to get started whenever you start a speech, how to engage with your audience. And for this, there's a few things that I like to consider. Imagine that you're entering a bar, and then there's people chatting, and you're entering that group, and then you're saying, hi, my name is Stijn. I like to ride my bike. I like to go for a hike, and I'm interested in rock music. I'm 35 years old, and I'm married, living in Antwerp. What happens with that group? They see that you're introducing yourself, and they just disperse. There's no one interested in this type of entry pitch. But on the other hand, if you go to a network event, there's people chatting in the room. You enter in this group, and you say, hey, Natasha, I believe we do know someone in common. How hard is it for Natasha to walk away from that? Chances are high that she would be interested in who that person might be, because it creates some kind of tension, some expectancy for more information. And this is what you should try to do when you're starting a speech too. You need to hook your audience into try to get more out of you, instead of having them walk away virtually or mentally to their iPhones, or physically when you're on a network event. So there's a few ways to get started on the right foot. I have thought of 3, and maybe I'll start with the third best option. It's to start with a question. Start with a question on that's somehow compelling to the audience, like a big what if question. What if we would be able to process data in this matter? Or what if your job would not longer involve traveling abroad? Something like this. It's a triggering question, and people might be curious, like Natasha would be curious about understanding who that common friend of ours might be. People might be curious about understanding the answer to that question. So that's a good way to get started, to focus people's attention to what you have to say. The second best way to start with a presentation is some kind of shocking factoids that you're thinking of. For example, there's more people alive today than have ever died until now. That's something that needs to sink in people's minds. And if they do that, they focus on that one issue, they focus on that one fact, and then you need to take it one step further, and then, of course, start with a fact that is relevant in your case, and then flip it over to something that is correlating to your speech. And this calibration of people's minds into stop from all the clutter that's going on in their heads, and having them focus on that one factoid, that also helps to focus people and to engage with what you have to say. Another fact that you might think of is, in 2 minutes, we capture globally enough energy, or there's enough energy from the sun radiating in 2 minutes on Earth to make sure that we would have that we would cover the annual expense of energy globally. That's another fact that needs to sink in people's heads. If you would just be able to capture all 100% of the energy of the sun for 2 minutes, then you would cover the global demand for energy on an annual basis. Of course, these are just some facts that I researched. try to think of something that correlates in your story too. And then, of course, we have, in my opinion, the best way to get started with a presentation. And I do think that in this case, I might even consider waiting for 20 or 30 seconds before I actually give this number one reason to get started, how to involve an audience. And you still be interested in understanding that number one fact. And this is exactly what I'm trying to convey to you, how to make sure that people are on the edge of their seat of what you have to say. When you're talking a story, when you're talking or when you're starting a story to a child, you would say, once upon a time, and then these kids would cramp up to you and make sure that their ears are wide. They start with everything that you have to say. They soak up everything that you have to say. Erase una vez. There, once upon a time. Tell a story. Tell something that that people can, transpose themselves in that situation. Because I do believe that also in our case, each speech that touches my attention or that touches my heart, that's something that starts from self-interest. And in this case, I think you can consider how Earth observation influenced you to be on this stage right now, why you are so passionate about this new technology, why you believe that this might change the way that we look at things, the way that we cover issues. And I do believe that in a lot of cases, you can tell the story starting from yourself, because you need to make sure that people trust you as an evangelist being on stage. They need to care about you as a person. And then you have to make sure that they decide that they will act upon your message. In order to make them decide and to act, they need to trust you. They need to connect with you, and this happens in an emotional, in a human way. You cannot just talk about numbers and talk about technology thresholds that some things might have, because that will be something that you might have just written in a leaflet or in an email. The reason why you're pitching it is because you want to connect with these people and touch their heart or their minds with your passion on it too. So that's my first and most important step whenever you're speaking, is to hook your audience with this message. And I'm not a type of person that writes a full speech down, but whenever I deliver a speech, this is something that I'm really deliberately rehearsing for a lot of times, is how to grab the audience's attention from the first second. What is the exact phrasing? What is the exact fact or question? What is the exact hook that I intend to use for that audience that grabs their attention? So this is step number one. Step number two is about the problem. And in this case, this is quite straightforward. And you will see that whenever we share our preparation as a project team, that we have already prepared some slides on Earth observation problems, need for improvement, and solutions. So you can cherry pick from those slides as well. But I do really believe that you need to tweak it to your personal story, to your personal takeaway message too. So for this, what's the big issue? You need to reflect on the point of view of your audience. What is their big issue? And this makes sense if you do have the time to prepare this, to connect with the organizer, to understand why people are subscribing to that conference, why are people going there, and what are the other speakers. So how you can be complementary to the story that will be delivered. Then you understand why people are there, And then you can understand what people hope to achieve from your talk. Second, step number 3, of course, whenever you have touched on this problem and the need for improvement, and I told you that it makes sense to try to validate that with some kind of raise of hands or anything for you to capture some feedback. If you see people nodding in the room whenever you're talking about something, it can be implicit too. But this is quite important. You validate on this problem, and then you move over to the solution. And for this, once again, if you do have a demonstration or something that brings it down to a really pragmatic way, that makes a lot of sense for people to understand as well. You can you need to try to avoid dwelling too long in a theoretical way. Maybe if you're talking to a more academic or theoretical audience, that might be a different story, of course. But once again, I do believe that if you're talking to experts on Earth observation, you don't need to convince them on the technology. There's something else that you might need to convince them on, and that's maybe on connecting to other countries, on sharing best practices, or whatever it might be. Whenever you're talking to an academic context, try to think of what's in it for them. What is the message that I want to deliver to them? What is the action that I want to spark? Then, of course, if you do have some achievements to show, and for this, you will see that we have a lot of use cases in each type of industry that you're in. So once again, you will be able to cherry pick and to go shopping in this preparation that we have done. Of course, you are an expert too, so you might have some personal stories, some things that you are aware of too. So for this, this is the time to drill it down to a level that people can say, okay, if that case was feasible, then my case will be feasible too. That's the game. That's the goal of this slide or this step in your pitch.
Okay, can I make a question?
Sure.
Okay, considering that we will be wearing the hat of fire rather than our companies or our institution hats. Normally, when you speak about a solution, you go very, very, very specific. But maybe we cannot talk about this very, very specific product here, right? Because let's say, for instance, for maritime, I should be covering the whole capacity of Earth observation industry, addressing issues in the maritime domain. So what is your advice here? Because yeah, I see it more like what technology can do rather than we have this solution and this is the price and this is how you would use it.
Exactly. I think so too, Juan, that in this case, the solution is the technology. It's the enabler of something that will follow. And of course, there's a lot of solution providers that do something with this technology indeed. But it's our aim to remain maybe a little bit higher on the meta level, where you talk about the potential of this technology and the solution as as a rough starting point indeed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then it might make sense if you go on this next step that you talk about achievements so far, then you can say, okay, so for example, Spotted did something with this data and they delivered on that use case. Or the University of Vienna, for example, they did something with this use case, and this is what they came up with. So these might be some achievements where you can once again pinpoint some things that you are aware of, just to make sure that it's relevant for your audience to hear those examples and not just go for generic ones. So I do think, Juan, that drilling it down to that level lower, where you talk about solution providers, that might be helpful, but rather in the achievements when you talk. So first you start with the technology, and then you can say, for example, company X did this, company Y did this. Yeah. And then the cost benefits step. Also, this one, you might need to translate this to your context. these are key messages that I normally say whenever people are pitching about their solution. In our case, it might be rather a holistic approach where you say, if you would be able to do this with this data, then you don't need to process them in this way. It might save some time. It might be more accurate. It might be a first time right. Whatever you can think of that that makes it attractive from a cost benefit analysis. That might be, in this case, for your context, the best way to move ahead. I would not skip this step, even though you're just advocating the technology. I would try to reflect it for people, because in the end, people will need to get back to their office and say to their colleagues who weren't attending the conference, hey, I heard about this new technology on Earth observation. I heard about some potential use cases that it might enable for us. And then the first question that will arise whenever they're back at their company from the management, for example, is, yeah, but isn't that hard to implement? Second question would be, yeah, but isn't it costly to implement? And these are the two questions that you need to probe for them, that you need to prepare. Wrap it around with a big bow tie in order to make sure that they can bring the exact argumentation home to their office on why it makes sense to move ahead. It's feasible, it's viable, and it's desirable. Those are the three main arguments that you need to convince your audience in. For example, you can do this starting from your own experience, that you said, I had this issue with this use case. I wanted to understand how this moved ahead, or how I could follow up on this type of issues regionally. Then I discovered how Earth observation could help me out. But of course, I needed to do the math. I needed to understand whether that would save me some time or cost me more time. And then you can start the story from your personal experience. And once again, that connects to an audience in a really convincing way too. And then last step of step number 6 is what's next? So what is the call to action that you want your audience to initiate? What do you want them to do whenever you get off stage? Do they need to connect with you? Do they need to go to the FIRE website? Do they need to research or read this type of article? What do you want people to do? And start with like a really tiny step, just to check whether people would be interested in moving ahead. Don't make this one too complex. Think of something that they feel is feasible whenever they get back home, that they initiate that next step. All right, so those are my 6 steps when you're talking about what could be a valid story to bring. That was part 1 of this of these steps, this presentation. Then I talk a little bit more on how to upgrade your pitch, how to upgrade your appearance in your slides, but also on stage. First of all, whenever you're using graphs, and this is a really big pitfall for a lot of people, in a lot of time, a graph can be quite overwhelming whenever people see it. This can be like a bar diagram with some correlations and some flag points in it. And in the end, you know this graph. You have been maybe working on it for hours and hours. So you see this graph and you can interpret it in 2 seconds. You see what should be seen. But for people who are new to a graph, even to like a simple pie chart in this case, I would highly recommend to highlight your point of attention and to cancel the noise. For example, if you want to talk about why, in this case, the yellow part is already 24% of the total use of specific data, make sure you just drop a lot of subtext on this one, maybe even cut out the colors on this, on the other types. Make sure that there's quite an attraction of people's eye to that yellow part of the bar of the pie chart in this case. I cannot overstate how important this is, especially in a lot of people who are into research. Sometimes you don't need a lot of these legends anymore. If you just have the pie chart and you tell the rest of the story, then people can understand this chart better than leaving all this text on the slide itself. The second one that's to me really important, and it can be quite appealing to try to do it, is to cram in more slides or more messages on one slide. I'm a big no on that. I do believe that one slide should be one message. And if you have a second message, then you should build a new slide. So people have focus on that one slide, focus on one message. Don't try to bulletize, maybe all at the end when you're delivering a summary, then you might consider multiple messages at the same time, but one message at a time, that's really important. On the other hand, that's maybe a bit more on the pro side of things, consistent layout colors, consistent font sizes, consistent fonts. Those things are quite important too. And you will see that in these slides, I try to be a good example on how it should be done. But in the end, of course, there might be some errors from my side, even still too. So this is quite important. You will see that the slides that we give to you already have quite a high standard of consistency in layout and in professionalism of this slide layout. Another thing, it's on supportive visuals. And for this is my slide where I bring all the bad examples into one slide. So please don't hate me for this, but this is things that you should avoid at all times whenever you're building a slide deck. I see still a lot of these cheap visuals that you would Google whenever you talk about collaboration, and then you would see these type of visuals popping up on Google page 1. These are the visuals that that just scream to me that you didn't spend enough time in preparing this presentation. If you use these type of outdated visuals, those 3D figures, this is for me really a letdown in professional presentations. Second one I see recurring quite often too is that people include cartoons in a presentation. This can be interesting if it really connects in the story that you're telling, but then it should be a full slide on this cartoon, because if you have this cartoon right here, a lot of you most likely tried to read it right now while I was speaking. So once again, you split up people's attention. You dilute people's attention from what you're saying towards the slides. And you never want that. You want people to have full attention to what you're saying. And the slide should just be the wallpaper. It should just be something that supports your story rather than actually being the centerpiece. Another one is happening quite a lot too, enlarged or pixelated visuals. If you have bad image quality, then still I wouldn't try to enlarge it when it becomes pixelated. What I do really hate as well is that you have text overlaying over visuals, like what you see happening over here in this slide. This is sloppy slide layout in my point of view, and I might be overstating some of the points that trigger me, but of course we want to maintain a high standard, and I see that you're all pros in public speaking, so I set the bar high then. Another thing is, whenever you have something written, you don't need the same type of image in the slide too. So this is redundant messaging. If you have something that's already clear in the visual, you don't need to have it textually too. So just try to avoid it, because it will, once again, it will split up people's attention into visual and written attention. Funky animations have been quite popular, especially with the new versions of PowerPoint. They can be quite a turn off for an audience too, especially if they're not functional. So of course, if you want to pinpoint something, or if you want to show how there's a transition from visual 1 to visual number 2, then of course a fade in and fade out can make sense. But if it doesn't, then I would just stick with easy fading animations like what you see in this presentation, rather than this funky one with bouncing items and so forth. I really like to work in a white or bannered background, and bannered, I mean, if you dedicate, in this case, a part of your slides for slide layout. For example, what you see here to the left, that's the fire slide layout. And you saw that Luisa in the morning session, she used that part of the slide for embedding some icons supportive to the story too. So this is a banner, of course, in your slide. If you use it consistently. Styling consistency, I've covered that one, and that would happen if I would use different font sizes, different fonts, different colors. Keep it as simple as possible, because it will be easier for people to digest what you have to say. And indeed, this is how it shouldn't be done. Then slide design tips. I just covered that one. Keep it simple and stupid. Normally, whenever we're talking about a slide deck, that's meant to be also some kind of minutes of meeting, like you saw in this morning session, then of course you can have a lot more text on it, because it will act as the document for sharing the content. If you're using a slide deck as a supportive material for a story that you want to bring, and as an evangelist you will have to bring a story, then I would really try to cut it down to no more than 6 words per line, no more than 6 lines per slide. Never go below font size 20. Work in bullet points, not in full written text, because it doesn't, you just need the exact words and you tell the rest of the story. The more you put on the slide, the more people will read the slide, the less they will listen to what you have to say. Also, I'm a big fan of using the full screen if you have the screen available, and of course be consistent in it. What I'm doing over here is also bulletizing. So you see that I have 6 bullet points over here, but I didn't even use the bullets, because it's obvious that these are 6 bullets of the key message that I want to bring. Cut down on the noise. If you don't need the bullets, then don't use the bullets.
I have a question.
All right. Sure.
Sorry, it's a comment. I mean, how flexible can we be with these 6 words per line? I mean, I see this slide, for instance, and to me, it looks very nice slide, but it's more than 6 words per line.
Yeah, it's a good point, Ilya. And
I really like the slide. You see, that's my point. So I wouldn't have changed it, but I think that 6 words is a little bit too strict.
Yeah, you might be right. You might be right on that. My main point on that one is avoid full sentences and avoid multiple messages on one slide. So therefore, people are inclined to deliver another disclaimer or deliver another side note, and slides get a lot of text in it, and it will be harder for people to digest. Sometimes it makes sense to just use one slide, go font size 80, and just have that 3 words that you want people to remember. Just burn it into their visual memory. Sometimes a font size 80 is a lot more effective than a lot of details on a slide. So indeed, 6 words might be overstating a little bit, but you do get the point on that, of course.
Great, thanks.
All right. 4 attention principles. If people are already in the afternoon of a conference, or like now in the afternoon of a session, you need to be really wary about whether they're shifting their attention to something else. So there's 4 main attention points. And the first one is that people can read and listen at the same time. I've said this over and over again, but the more you put on your slide, the less they will listen to you as a storyteller. The less they listen to you, the less they will connect to you personally, the less they will be inclined to act upon your call to action at the end of the presentation. Another thing is people cannot listen and think at the same time. Whenever you're posing a question on whether people think that this technology might be useful for their industry too, then it's okay to just take a short break, drink a little bit of water, because if you move ahead with your story, after you have posed the question, people might be still reflecting on it, and they might have missed 2 sentences of what you have of the rest of your story, and they might deconnect because they cannot follow anymore. Just like you would have when you went out of the movies for 5 minutes, then the rest of the movie becomes harder to follow. Another attention principle is open with a strong hook, close with a strong statement. These are the 2 main attention points in each speech, in each pitch. These are the things that you need to rehearse, that you need to make sure that you will be delivering them rightly. And then, of course, another attention principle, the less you put on a slide, the better. Less is more, keep it simple and stupid. Another thing, and that's quite hard to do in this case, is how to involve the audience. Especially in larger audiences, this can be paradoxically harder to attach or to connect with these people. I do believe in a few tips and tricks on that. First of all, make it mentally attractive for them. So make sure that whatever they see is effective. Secondly, of course, make it verbally interactive. So pose some questions to them, allow them to comment. And then third, of course, is it might be physical, that people get involved. For example, that you ask people to raise their hands, or that, for example, you ask the whole audience to get up on their feet, and then you pose a question, and whoever has to answer no, he has to sit down again. A second question, whoever has to answer no, sits down again. And then you end with a few people who are answering 5 times yes to a specific set of questions, and those will be the ones where you pose, where you ask people to tell a story on how they're using Earth observation, for example. This can be quite an interesting way, and this can be done in a digital setting too. For example, you ask all people in the Zoom call to raise their hands, you pose the question, and people have to click their hands whenever they're not answering yes anymore. This is just, of course, just one example on how to involve people, but try to be deliberate about this one too. It helps people if they are actively engaged in your story. It helps people to remember it afterwards. This is another big tip. And at this point in time, I'd like to ask you once again whether you have any best practices that you've seen, that you've done on how to involve the audience. Is there anyone who has a cool story on that one?
No cool stories.
No cool stories.
Yeah. I have a story, but it's not cool either.
Plenty of terrible, maybe.
And can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I think, I mean, in my experience, even just allowing people to ask questions, like really leaving time for questions at the end is quite important. I don't know about other industries, but definitely like in raw materials, they tend to be extremely reluctant to like the idea of integrating Earth observation. So they're very negative in their questions. So sometimes like because you have a lot to say and because you're maybe fearing also like, you know, aggressive questions, you can skip the question part. And I think, of course, we shouldn't. And the better prepared you are then to answer these questions, the better, but just actually really leaving time. Because sometimes people really want to ask questions, even if it's because they want to like, you know, break down your story because they have so many bad experiences or they have already all these ideas of how it's not going to work for them. Yeah, I think, especially when we're trying to change people's minds, like letting them time to speak up.
Sure, that's a good point. Thank you for sharing, Irene.
You're welcome.
All right.
I have one point. I'm not sure if it would have been interesting, depending on the audience, of course. But there's been cases for me that I used Mentimeter. I'm not sure whoever is aware. So it becomes more like interactive, like short questions, but that requires also time for them to go online, answer or mark some questions. And then it was interactive on the sense that I could bring the results in real time, and I could present, or the audience could see the results in real time.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm a big fan of Mentimeter too. If you're speaking at an event, you can ask whether there's some kind of software service that you might use during your speech too. Like instant surveys, like Mentimeter can be really cool to do so indeed. I've been to a conference where they had a more old school measurement where they would just have a green and a red card glued underneath each seat. And then it was your time. And then you said, okay, under each seat is a green and a red card attached. And then people would go and find their green and red cards in order to act as an audience on specific statements that you would have true or false statements as a speaker. This is a really fun thing to do. Something that I've been part of too was during a conference where a speaker just launched a provocative question on, for example, the technology readiness levels for these type of applications. And rather than having a Q&A from the audience, he just said, for the next 2 to 3 minutes, you can just discuss with your neighbor on how you feel about this statement. And then he would just turn off his microphone so people would maybe be a bit awkward for 10 seconds, but then they would starting to their companion. And this is something, there's a lot of power in the crowd where there's a lot of experts that might have an opinion on it, and people might even learn more from their neighbor's opinion than from yours. So allow people to connect with the setting that you have too. Of course, when we're talking about a remote context, this is a bit harder to do, but then you might have the chat, and then you might trigger people to interact on the chat. Of course, make sure that whenever you trigger something, that you are able to pull their attention back to when you're restarting your presentation, because of course you don't want people to remain chatting and not paying attention to your story anymore. These are just a few thoughts, and if you would Google on this, you would see a lot of creative examples on how to interact with it too. I do have a few more slides, and I'm aware that I'm already 5 minutes beyond the given time slot, so I'll keep it condensed. Public speaking is also about what you don't say, and I think that we had, among others, we had Juan, who mentioned that it's about body language. And if you would look at this slide, this is a result from a research that has been done. Only 7% of the story that you're conveying to the audience, only 7% is related to the actual words that you're using. 38, so almost 40% is related to how you're stressing words, to when you are pausing, to when you are having a high pitch or a low pitch in your voice. So this is all the vocal parts that help to convey a story. And then of course there's a little over 50% that's on how you appear. For example, Ilya mentioned that for him it makes sense to act in a convincing way is when he's happy, when he can show that he's passionate about the topic. These are the things that help for people to get a message sticking in their heads too. I brought a few body language tips, which are of course really hard to maintain in this remote context. Try to keep eye contact with an audience, and this might mean that you look slightly above each one's heads, but don't focus on one part of the room. Avoid distracting fidgeting toys, especially when you're on stage, with a pen, with your buckle of your belt, whatever that might distract the people's attention. Try to stand tall, face frontally whenever you are forced to deliver a speech seated, try to find a way to get out of that seat, because whenever you're seated, you seem like a bit already defeated as a speaker. And you need to maintain this open attitude, which is a lot harder whenever you have to sit down on a desk or in a panel or something. Some people struggle with moving on stage. A lot of people struggle in moving too much on stage. So if you have received some feedback by colleagues or by peers that you're quite the tornado online, then you can think of on which slide am I going to walk. And whenever you're stopping, that's the right moment in time to deliver a key message of your presentation. Because when you're stopping, people will focus their attention to, and they will be more inclined to listen. Then, of course, using meaningful gestures. Don't overact on these gestures, although right now I'm in a remote setting, so I'm using my hands quite a lot. When you're doing this in a public, in a physical setting, then it might be that you're acting too much with your hands, and then you need to tune it down one bit. But using meaningful gestures, for example, if you're making a summary in 3 action points, then it makes sense to maintain your hands at this gesture, and to start with number 1 and talk about what you have to say on that number 1 case. Then move over to number 2, and my hand will remain up for the audience too, so that they are somehow still aware that I'm in the middle of my 3 key takeaways. And then you go to number 3. Those are the 3 ones that you want people to remember. Use those gestures to maintain people's attention, and it will help to get the message across. And then last but not least, I do believe that smiling is connecting with people, and that people who are connected with you are more inclined to listen, are more inclined to act on your final call to action. So this helps for people to remain on board. And then my last slide of this presentation is on how to overcome stage fright. There's a lot of moments in time where I have discovered myself indeed when I thought I was well prepared, and then I wasn't, because just something small happened. The stage was a lot bigger than I imagined. I had to wear these wireless Madonna type of microphones, and I wasn't prepared for that. So there's a lot of things that might happen that you didn't prepare for. A few tips that always help with me is to try to break the ice together with your audience with a small anecdote. If you're laughing together with an audience, it will help you to release all the cortisol that you have, the stress hormone in your brain and in your body. If you're laughing together, it will help to ease the tension. Of course, it's not easy to think of something when you're stressed out. So once again, this is something that I like to prepare up front, that I have as a trick on my sleeve. Whenever I feel stressed, I can start with this anecdote to ease the tension. Another thing that I think was a message from Irene too is there's no shortcuts to greatness. You need to practice and practice and practice all over again, but do it in a deliberate way. Indeed, try to film yourself, try to capture yourself, and understand where you're not happy in a specific part. If you just read the same text that you have prepared 20 times during a plane flight, it might not be deliberate practice, and you think you're well prepared, but in the end, you have just mindlessly read your speech. That's not the same thing. Another thing that I think Miriam said is expect the adrenaline, expect the anxiety, expect it, and then accept it, because this is something really natural that happens in your body. The adrenaline will get pumping, and that's because you care about something. You want to do it in the right way. And if you are somehow proactive, or you know that this will be coming, you won't get surprised by the pumping adrenaline. You can say to yourself, there it is, now I'm feeling the tension. Right before you go on stage, then you can say, there it is, I was expecting this. So then it doesn't catch you off guard. And also this one helps me out, that this is not because I'm afraid that I will not be able to deliver, but it's a natural reaction for my body to make sure that I'm delivering in the right way. Another thing is that it's okay to pause, to drink, or to breathe. It happened to me quite a lot of times already that whenever you're talking, you tend to speed up, and that's what has been discussed right before too. That when you're ever talking fast, you forget to breathe because you want to deliver one sentence right after the other. When you forget to breathe, your mouth will get sticky and dry, and then it will only accelerate this process of stress. So whenever you feel you're getting short-breathed, it's okay to just leave the slide as it is, to say to people, and I want you to read these 4 bullets and make sure that you're understanding them right. And at that point, you just take a drink. It doesn't matter if you're silent for 5 seconds, no one will shoot you off stage. Another thing is that what helps me a lot is putting on my kind of power outfit. Sometimes it's a suit. If it's not a suit, it might be sneakers. Try to wear something where you feel confident. And this is really important for me as well, that I'm not wearing suit and tie if I don't feel comfortable in it. I rather go on stage with something that's close to my personal my personality. And when you're short-breathed, this is something that you can do even before you go on stage. This just is a physiological reaction to take deep breaths, to hold it, and slow your breathing. Lower your shoulders, put your shoulders to the back, and breathe slowly. This helps. If you do this for 10 deliberate breathings in and out before you go on stage, it will help to reduce the cortisol in your mind too. And then, last but not least, I've brought a few tips and tricks specifically for remote pitching. I've just pointed them out, things that you can do before the call, things that you can do to connect with the audience in a remote setting. And these are just the two slides that I will share with you after this presentation, because as you can see, it's just a lot of text and it's just plain simple tricks on how to work with a second screen, how to work with transitions, how to check your audio and video connection and so forth. So this is the presentation that I wanted to show you on how to maybe get better at pitching. I see that I have overspent my time, but I do hope that it has been interesting and that you somehow got a few new tips and tricks for you as a public speaker too. I don't know whether we still have time for questions, but as you know, we will be, from now on, we will be connecting with you one-on-one. So whenever you have prepared your personal presentation, we can rehearse on how you bring it. And I will be honest and open, but of course in a professional way, to try to assist you on how to bring it even to the next level, visually, content-wise, but also on how you bring it. And this is something that we can do in a confident one-on-one setting. There we go. Thank you very much.
But it would be nice to get some questions now, because people are warm. They might want to ask something. So feel free, even if we are a bit late.
I have one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. One question. Do you have like maybe your top 5 pitches that you have seen? I mean, I think that also for me is really useful, because when I have seen certain TED Talks and I share with people also that wants to present or being mentor, I think also gives me like the exact example about what I want to become when I present. So if you also can share your top presentations, it will be, I think, a great asset for us.
Yeah, sure, I can do this, but these are the ones that connect to me to the best, and that's also still a bit a personal feeling. For example, I've seen this presentation of Inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator from the TED Talk. That's a really nice presentation, but it's just he has just sketched his story. He's not using any words, and he's just using a metaphor to deliver his speech. I really like it because of its creativity and its uniqueness. And in the end, the story is something that you could say on 2 minutes. But of course, each TED Talk has 18 minutes of time, so he just stretches it to 18 minutes with a nice story. And that's what I like about it. He captures me from the first idea right until the last one. But it's personal. But I will do this, Miriam, for you. No worries. There's a few Shark Tank presentations that might be interesting too. If you really have to be concise in 2 minutes, these are the ones to turn to.
Thank you.
Really, I guess.
Well, I really enjoyed the presentation, actually. But I think in the new era of our working environment, where everything is remote, we have a lot of challenges. And since the attention goes 55% to physical kind of like messages, then somehow we need to compensate. I wonder if there are kind of like solutions, proposals, tricks, I mean, it's kind of like new, it's only 1 year that these things have been happening. So I'm not sure if the community has built up on tips around that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and we provide a lot of trainings or coaching sessions for larger groups too, and just in the end, I just kind of accepted that it is less qualitative than a physical interaction. And on the other hand, we need to be even more prepared or deliberate on each slide or on each message that we want to bring, because it's even easier for people to wander away from the story that you're bringing. And there's nothing you can do about it. Well, maybe there are these kind of features where you can make sure that they only force your screen, but then it's just like force feeding the goose. You just need to make sure that whatever you're saying is interesting for people to hear. And on the other hand, I kind of accepted that people sometimes check their email or wander away for a little bit. If you're with these type of smaller groups, it can make sense to ask for people to maintain their video open. This brings a little bit of responsibility to the other respondents too, that they don't dwell away or don't go to their living room to do something while you're speaking. Of course, when you're hosting something with 50 or 100 people, then a video might not be interesting too, but a remote pitch or a remote speech might benefit from more interactions even. And then you try to be shorter on the message that you want to bring, a little less depth in what you have to bring, and compensate it with more interaction. For example, with just some things that you put in the chat to engage people actively in the presentation, so they will feel inclined or obliged to keep focus and don't go to their inbox, because each 5 minutes you're posing a question and you want some feedback, and then you're just asking Juan, what do you think about this tip and trick? And then make sure that people are somehow forced to interact or forced to maintain connection. That would be my way of working.
Thanks.
All right.
Small comment from my side, if I may. Yeah, so congratulations on the presentation. I think it was great as well. Some very nice tips.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to share some of my experiences. I'm not a pitch professional at all, but I get worried a lot or try to prepare, especially to understand human attention and perception and communication. And as we have many scientists here, I think there are great tools out there, great books that explain how human brain works. So how perception works and how attention works. And this is a great. What I found is that simplicity is always your friend. So KISS, the simpler, the better. I'm aware that we live in a world, with so many data, especially if we are speaking about space, petabytes of data. But the reality is that human brain cannot digest so many data. We have a very bad attention. We have a very, very bad memory. So even at the risk of maybe not saying many things, just to try to narrow it down to 3 messages in the whole pitch, very simple words. I think I don't use 6 words in a sentence. I try to use even less. And sometimes I try even not to use words at all. It's very difficult. But happy to have your comments and suggestions, because when I try to analyze myself, I mean, we're very bad at attention. It's very, very difficult, even if it's interesting for you to keep attention during, for instance, today's workshop all the time, Even if you want to attend all the time, it's impossible. We're not designed for that.
Yeah, very true. And I do believe that whenever you're at a conference, it can be really, I don't know, we're recording this session, but it can be really badass if you don't use any slides at all. Sometimes you see these people who just get on stage, they get 15 minutes and they know what they will talk about and they know where they want to end up. And they don't even need slides for that story. And paradoxically, those ones are, in a lot of cases, those ones are the ones that hook your attention from beginning to end. And so once again, if you're in a program of a lot of speakers, you need to try to stand out by simplicity with an easy story. Do something fun with your audience, trigger their minds, just not all of it. Try to think of one thing that makes you stand out, and it will help the audience to feel that you're actually the break instead of the break that's about to follow.
Yeah.
And another thing, Ilya, is what you can do is when you start a presentation and you say, I want all of you to think of one key takeaway that you take out after my speech. And I will ask some of you to debrief this key takeaway. I could have done, when I'm thinking about this, I could have done this at the end of, at the start of my presentation too. And it might have helped you to pay more attention or to reflect actively on how my content is relevant for your context. So that might be some, like a tip for you as well. When you're talking about Earth observation, what is the key takeaway that you take home back to your colleagues? You ask people up front that this is what you will say at the end, or you will ask at the end, and at the end, of course, you ask people what they took from it.
Yeah.
All right.
What's your opinion, Remco? You mentioned you are expert in social media. It would be great to have your view.
Sure. As in social media, these talks are to bring a point across. So I completely agree with what we heard so far about having a point and making sure that people remember that point. What I notice in these talks, and that's why I'm a little bit hesitant on doing, for example, a 1 hour speech or a 1 hour presentation. Those are always lethal. I'm really in favor of these very short concepts. At Space Up, we have what we call a T-5 talk, which is sort of a Pecha Kucha, maybe you've heard of it, where you have a set number of slides that automatically progress every number of seconds, and you are forced to bring your message in a very short amount of time. No rubbish around it, but bring your point in 5 minutes exactly, because after 5 minutes, you are, well, almost kicked out of stage. And you have to bring your message very concisely. And what I know, and that's true in social media as much as it is in these speeches, people can only remember a maximum of 3 points, preferably one. There should always be one big takeaway, but people will never remember more than 3 key points. And whether you have 5 minutes or you have an hour, people will remember 1, 2, or 3 things, and that's it. And that for me is the key, is to make sure that people remember that. And what Stijn was just saying about having people repeat that key point to you, that's a way, even if you don't ask them at the end, or even if you ask it without expecting an answer, people will think about it. And that's what you want. You want people a day later to tell their colleagues or their family or whatever, on this speech, I remember this one point, or I saw this great visual with this story, and that's what I'm going to do something with. That to me is key. I would hate to be given a 1 hour time slot. Would be
What a nightmare.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Remco. That's indeed, I think the TED Talks are setting the standards on what is a best practice on pitching. So there's a lot of how to bring a TED Talk tips and tricks online too. And you see that they never go beyond these 18 minutes because indeed they have just discovered that this is our time span that we can spend optimally on one story. So that's a really good point too. All right. I see that we're approaching 3 o'clock, at least in Antwerp. I don't know whether that's the case in your countries, but maybe it's time to move ahead to the next step in this program, which is sharing some of these preparations that we have done. And I don't know, Nico from Evenflow, are you the one who will be?
Yeah.
That's me, right?
All right.
So then let me share my screen as long as I'm allowed to, but it's disabled for me at the moment.
Yeah. So yeah, Stijn needs to give you access.
All right. Let's see.
It's then the green button, share screen. You can give access to multiple people.
Make host.
You can also make him co-host. Now, Nico, you better stay with us till the end.
So looks good for me. Hope it looks good for you.
Yes, I see it.
Okay, so thank you, Stijn, for your presentation. I wish I would have seen it before I prepared these 63 slides that I have here for you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all text, font size 18. But don't worry, because these slides are not meant to be a presentation, really. These represent our sectorial cards. And
you have paid great attention, Nico. I see that you took home the right message.
And what was meant to do with this presentation, that is not really a presentation, is to bring you near the concept of these sectorial cards that we have created. And these will also explain a bit the focus that we have set ourselves. So it will explain a bit our motivation for why we have chosen these 6 sectors. Why do we find them important? And gives a few examples of applications and technologies that are applied in particular for these sectors. And they have been our starting point for engaging with different user communities. So earlier, the question was asked, do you already have the vision for your roadmap? Do you already know how it will look like? And I said, well, we try to make it as unbiased as possible, but we did have to start somewhere. So we started with these sectorial cards that somehow, and they were not PowerPointed to begin with. They were like work documents that we could use to confront different user communities with our view on their sector. and contain a number of facts, and then they were designed, of course, to be part of a report. So apologies, this is lots of text, but no comics. So these sector cards are supposed to represent the status quo of a sector. So, from our point of view, more global challenges that these sectors are faced with, policies and initiatives that drive the sector and impact, of course, the challenges that they have, as well as example projects that are already applying Earth observation or could apply Earth observation to tackle these challenges. And we give an overview of what Earth observation can already do today. And this is supposed to start the discussion then with potential users in after we gave them some impulses on what is possible and what we think are their challenges. So they tell us what their real challenges are and how a solution would have to look like to be of use to them and that they would actually use them. So to start with the first sector of agriculture, this was chosen because, of course, it is a key sector. It is the sector that feeds all of us. It is of economic importance for Europe, for the world. And it is probably also one of the more advanced sectors as regards the application of Earth observation and the capabilities of Earth observation, what Earth observation can do for it. To name a few important policies also that drive this sector and where Earth observation can support enforcing these policies or supporting different stakeholders such as farmers in achieving certain goals. There's always, of course, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that has some applicability to any of the sectors that we are talking about. Here, in this case, there's the goal of zero hunger. So agriculture has to feed more and more people. And what Earth observation can help agriculture with is mostly optimization. So optimize the inputs that you need to produce something and optimize the output. So you can, with a limited amount of land that is available to grow crops, feed as many people as possible. In Europe, there's the most important policy, probably the Common Agricultural Policy, because this also pays the farmers following certain objectives that they have to fulfill. And in particularly here in recent years, there has been an uptake of applying Earth observation in providing the checks that are necessary. So, of course, you agree to plant a certain crop in exchange for certain subsidies, and then it needs to be checked if you really planted that crop, if you really harvested it at a certain time, if you really grew the specific variety of a crop. So this is where Earth observation today already is applied a lot. And there are many other policies that are linked to climate change, to environmental change, because agriculture does have an environmental footprint that is significant. And we have listed these here, as well as provided an overview of existing research and innovation activities that we know about. And this is not a complete list, but this is again meant to be a resource also for you, maybe to pick from and to maybe look deeper into it and to build a story upon, depending on the audience that you might be confronted with. So there are various projects that deal with the monitoring of agricultural assets, the support of the Common Agricultural Policy, payment systems, and different types of applications in monitoring the health of your crops, monitoring climate that can have an impact on your products. And these slides are meant to be a resource then also for you to either look deeper into the topic or maybe also to utilize them in your presentations, just with less text and bigger font sizes, of course. So the challenges that we see from our perspective, and we already confronted a first round of focus group participants with these that confirmed these and added to these, and the sectorial cards are meant to be a living document that will also be updated over time, and we will also appreciate your feedback, of course, as experts in the respective sectors. The challenges that we see for agriculture is the population growth that I've already mentioned. So the Earth's population is growing and they need to be fed. There's climate change that has an impact on what you can actually grow in a certain area, and where you need to make predictions and where you have to deal with damages in a different way. There's the environmental footprint. Agriculture uses a lot of water, fertilizer, herbicides, machinery that pollutes, which has to be monitored because there are certain rules to be followed, but also reduced, which can be done with the help of Earth observation. A big problem is also the one of the perceived technological barriers. So while I don't want to underestimate the small farmer because I believe they do use a lot of high-tech solutions already, but still there's a perception of Earth observation, if you think of it as something that is related to satellites, that this is indeed rocket science and not affordable and maybe not applicable for them. And this is a barrier that is maybe true for many of the sectors that has to be reduced, also by means of the EO Evangelists program in the end that is supposed to tell the story in a convincing way in the language that they speak, and presenting in a simple way what Earth observation can already do, and that it's actually not rocket science, because in the end you get data that somebody knows to deal with and results that the farmer will be able to understand. Of course, we need to have the farmers and the other stakeholders in the agricultural sector on board to define with us what they can work with, because this is what the Earth observation specialist might not know. So we need to bridge and reduce these barriers. To give a few examples of what Earth observation can already do, one application is in crop monitoring. So you can monitor the health status of your crops. You can know when they maybe need irrigation, when they need water, when they need fertilizer. You can apply it in only selected parts, because maybe only a small part of your parcel is maybe sick, so you only apply the herbicides there. So you can optimize the input, but you can also optimize the output by knowing in advance when is the best moment to harvest. There's the application of compliance monitoring, as mentioned before, for example, in the context of the CAP, where you have to prove that you really were growing the right type of crops, that you were mowing your fields at the agreed time of the year, that you don't grow illegal crops, etc. And there's the application of environmental impact monitoring too. In the end, there's also the farm to fork strategy that really wants to make it very transparent where your food is coming from the field to the processing plants, to the supermarket, to your table, and to really track also who has maybe caused a certain environmental impact on the way. So satellite data in particular is, of course, because it's available, because it's constantly taking imagery of the whole globe and time series of images, it will allow you also to track who's maybe the polluter, and also what is in the end the impact of the type of agriculture we currently perform on water resources, on biodiversity, etc. An upcoming field is also the one of commodity monitoring. So traders are highly interested, of course, in knowing what is the demand and the supply of certain commodities, and agricultural products are such a commodity as well that are traded and also see certain price fluctuations. So traders are very interested in knowing what is in stock. This data is still not very precise because you cannot really see what is inside these silos, what type of product and how much of it. But with enough of also other types of data, also on transportation and certain indicators, one can already make a good guess of how well the stocks are filled with a certain produce. And this might be an upcoming field, which is also true for other sectors, like in the oil and gas sector. This is already practiced a lot to see how are the oil reserves and to predict the impact on the price of oil, for example. Then the insurance sector is highly interested in, of course, knowing of potential disasters that lead to losses. So what is the risk in a certain area for farming, and a bit similar as to the commodity monitoring. So security planning is of importance because certain produce might become limited. Even on a regional level, you want to ensure that you have enough stocks of let's say wheat, for example, to keep your folks happy. And the technologies that enable this, and this slide will repeat a lot for all the FD sectors, just with different flavors of how to apply them, are listed here as a few examples, and more examples might come also from things that Anestes has already prepared in the past. So there's rich material, and that's maybe also the beauty of Earth observation as a topic. You will be able, because it's very visual at times, to get your message across with a few images. So you will not need this text as here, but you need to know, of course, what you're talking about. So examples are the multispectral or hyperspectral images that allow you to monitor vegetation growth, the moisture in your soil, and optimize the time of the harvest and your irrigation, for example. There's radar imagery such as SAR or INSAR that allows to monitor also the impacts of agriculture, because it might change the elevation of the surface, but also to monitor your crops. And the advantage of radar imagery is, of course, that images like the hyperspectral, multispectral images, you can only take if there are no clouds, but there are clouds very often, in particular here in Belgium. And radar is able to go through the clouds, and you still get your visuals continuously throughout the year, independent of the weather, which is very useful. But Earth observation is not only satellites. Of course, this project is funded through the Horizon 2020 program, and certainly there's an interest to also promote the EO space program, which is of course the Copernicus Sentinels mainly, and the Copernicus program. But of course also the satellites often can just complement data, and only together with other data provide a meaningful picture. So in situ is an element also of Copernicus, but then in situ sensors are part of many sectors that provide additional data, more precise data, more local data, or data to validate your satellite images. And that can be, in the case of agriculture, for example, sensors providing information about the soil quality, about the moisture, about local temperature, wind, etc. Also important, as I said, agriculture has a large environmental footprint, is measuring the greenhouse gas emissions related to agriculture, which can be done with certain instruments of satellites as well, for example, the Sentinel-5. And again, not only not only satellites are Earth observation, but drones are applied to any of the sectors that we are looking at in fire. And in particular in agriculture, they're rather advanced, not only for Earth observation purposes, but they can also be used to actually apply fertilizer or herbicides, while our focus is still on Earth observation, where they can provide very high resolution imagery. The Sentinel images are not always high resolution enough to identify any type of crop or to work with any type of parcel. So in certain cases, you might need to complement your data with higher resolution data, which can come from also small satellites that flies in the lower orbit, or for example, from drones. When we first defined our sectors, we chose the energy sector as one of the important ones. We decided to focus on renewable energies, and it became apparent that renewable is not renewable when it comes to the requirements towards Earth observation. So wind energy will have completely different benefits from different instruments of Earth observation than solar energy. And thus we focused with this second sector on the wind energy part. We do not exclude that we will also include solar energy at one point. But for now, we do focus on wind, which is the biggest share of renewable energy also in Europe, and is explicitly mentioned also as one of the cornerstones of the European Green Deal, which is a set of policies towards climate neutrality, and also an important economic factor, as much of the capacity of wind power is also produced in Europe. There are a few other policies and directives beyond the European Green Deal that are of relevance and demand the use of a high percentage of renewable energy. So these will drive the sector also of wind energy. There are a number of targets to achieve in the near future, and there are also a few projects, though we noticed that in the course of the first focus group discussion that applications for wind energy are still apparently limited when it comes to satellite data, because there are limitations. Of course, we want to measure the wind speeds, which satellites on land can only do in a certain height, so which is much above the height of the towers and wind turbines. So applications there are limited, but there's also an increase in offshore capacity of wind energy, where satellites have different capabilities to measure also wind speeds, for example, and at the surface of the ocean. So these are just a very few examples of research and innovation projects that we are aware of that are supporting wind energy specifically with Earth observation. But there might be more potential from other forms of Earth observation than satellites, such as drones and in situ sensors that can be integrated in an Earth observation solution. Challenges that we see in the sector are mostly related to forecasting. So wind is not always available, and we want to know, of course, when the wind is available, so we have the energy that we need, but also not to overload our electricity network, our grids, when there's maybe too much available. So the renewable energy creates certain requirements also for redesigning our grids. We need information about where to put these wind farms. For one, we want to optimize, of course, the outputs. So we need to find a position that is favorable in terms of elevation and available wind. But there's also the issue of social acceptance. So everybody wants to have the green energy, but nobody wants to have the windmill in front of their house. So Earth observation can also help finding sites that avoid conflicts of that nature and still optimize the energy output. There are the phases of construction and planning of facilities to generate wind power, in which Earth observation can help, and other areas that are challenging to the industries are that they have to monitor, of course, their infrastructure, the health of the infrastructure, the conditions, and to predict also extreme weather events, because if it's too stormy, you need to turn off your windmill actually, because it will rotate too fast, it will overheat, it will actually catch fire. So there's lots of information needs that can be helped with the Earth observation. Here also just a few examples where we already see potential and where we hope to, through discussions with the community, to find maybe more application fields. Is one, the planning of sites where to install wind power, and then when they are in operation, to monitor and assess their conditions. This is still very limited. It's still mostly done by drones, because you need to go very close to the windmill as such to inspect the blades, where autonomous drones can just get you a much better image than a satellite would do. But then the windmills are also connected to the grid, of course, which also needs to be inspected and maintained where there are more applications. For example, vegetation can impact the power grid lines that again can be monitored with multispectral or hyperspectral imagery. The wind can be measured also with radar data from satellites, and in situ data will always complement the satellite data, if not the other way around, to know what are local weather conditions and other. Then, as I said before, there's a tendency to go more offshore also with the wind installations, and their satellites can provide already much more valuable data on weather and mid-ocean data that can help planning where to put your wind farms and to predict the output in operations. And again, you will see the same examples again and again of the drones and the small satellites. So when I talk about small satellites, then this often refers to also the private constellations that are out there that typically use more satellites, smaller satellites in a lower orbit, which has the advantage of much higher frequency of revisit times and also higher resolution. And in some of these cases, this is of advantage because the Copernicus data doesn't always have the high revisit time or resolution that you need for a time series of very precise images. So these satellites always are handy in complementing data when Copernicus is not sufficient. And the next sector is the one of infrastructure. And again, I want to just inform you how we define the sector. Infrastructure can be many things. Here we focused on mainly transportation infrastructure, such as roads, railways, and the bridges and tunnels. and not, for example, on the energy grid, which is supposed to be covered by the wind energy sector. Again, this is a very crucial sector, which is why it has been chosen, because of course all our goods are transported on this infrastructure, and people are connected by transportation infrastructure, and the impact on the economy can be very serious if this infrastructure breaks down. So recently, the example of the cargo ship that blocked the Suez Canal, which had a great impact on the global economy. Of course, this was not a breakdown of the infrastructure as such, but blocking the infrastructure. But a similar effect could be seen if important road connections are interrupted for a period of time. Thus, it is very crucial also for the safety of the citizens and of those that are using the infrastructure to maintain this infrastructure, which is often large networks. And beyond roads, railways, bridges, we also look at pipelines, which we consider critical infrastructure. Once in urban areas, of course, they bring us the water, they bring us the gas, they take away the sewage, but also for the longer distance transportation of certain goods such as gas or oil. They are very crucial, and interruptions such as we have seen now in the US also that followed a hacker attack can have again a great impact on the economy and on the well, sometimes also on the safety, because pipelines might also be the target of third parties to maybe steal from them, which can have yeah, also security impact if there are explosions that you want to avoid. And we just decided that monitoring pipelines is also in the focus of the infrastructure sector. Again, also for you as a resource for further reading, there are a number of policies and initiatives that we identified that can drive the need to innovate in this sector, and they justify also our choice of having infrastructure as one of our key sectors. Again, the sustainability development goals are to be mentioned here, and a number of directives related to transportation in Europe that demand the maintenance also for the security of its citizens and the availability for economic purposes. Also, we have seen that impacts from pandemics such as COVID's are also testing our infrastructure. There's a higher need for certain goods to be transported, and the infrastructure has to keep up with these and has to benefit from predictions, from better planning, and from maintenance, which is where Earth observation can come to support. Again, for you, a few examples of research and innovation projects that we have already identified dealing with the matter in areas such as roads or rail or pipeline infrastructure that apply Earth observation to monitor infrastructure and their structural stability, the ground movement that can be caused by construction or operation of infrastructure, and that apply to different types of infrastructures such as railway, roads, dams, or also energy infrastructure, and even cultural heritage, because a bridge is infrastructure, but if Michelangelo was walking over it, it's also a piece of cultural heritage that needs to be particularly protected. And there are a number of projects and even products that focus even on cultural heritage protection using Earth observation. The challenges that we have identified and that were confirmed so far by our focus group discussion are the environmental footprint that the infrastructure creates. So concrete is one of the greatest polluter of our time. So the production of the concrete to produce infrastructure has its footprint, and lots of soil is moved to build large infrastructures. And this footprint has to be reduced through better planning, and it has to be monitored also in terms of illegal infrastructures. There's an increased interconnection of infrastructure systems. So there's very complex and networked infrastructure that provides also new opportunities to monitor it, but also puts it at higher risk. There's again the trend towards the growing population that puts the infrastructure to its limits, and also again an environmental impact that has it's the land use and the limited availability of this land. So we need solutions to find the right location to optimize the use of the land. That is a scarce resource as well. Application examples that we see are again in vegetation management. That is, for example, true for railway infrastructures and in particular for electric railway lines that need to be constantly monitored, where Earth observation can come to the help. Pipeline monitoring, where you can monitor the ground stability under the pipelines, where you can monitor third parties infringing maybe on your pipelines, and construction monitoring as such, from planning over construction, and for different purposes. It can be the project management task, it can be the monitoring of maybe illegal construction, it can be the monitoring of the effect of this construction on its surroundings, so maybe not on the infrastructure itself, but on other buildings that are affected by it. And the mapping of transportation networks. So there's also lots of legacy infrastructure that has been built 100 years ago. So I recently read that the Belgian railway has just replaced some railway lines that date back to 1928. These are not yet maybe on a digital map because they were planned in a different time, and satellites can map legacy infrastructure. They can also recognize of what material these are. So roads are not roads. Some are made from concrete, some are made from tarmac, and they can recognize the material and certain indicators about the aging of these materials, which can increase the efficiency of maintenance. It doesn't need any more personnel looking at every meter of the road, but can also in remote areas that are difficult to reach support the mapping, but also the monitoring of the conditions of this infrastructure, such as roads.
Nico?
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I have seen several examples in which you have showcased the use of drones, right?
Yes.
So as EO Evangelists, I guess we are including drones as an Earth observation tool as well.
I believe so. So as I said, of course, as a Horizon 2020 funded project, we are encouraged to promote the use of the Copernicus program and of the EU space program. But in the end, we are interested in providing solutions to the sector that are usable to them, and often often data only makes sense in combination with other data, and drones can either complement the satellite data, or satellite data can complement the drone. So we don't see it as competing, but as complementary data. And the solution providers, they are not specializing in building satellites. They are specialized in processing data, and to them it doesn't matter that much if the data comes from the satellite or from a drone. But rather the quality of the data for a specific purpose. So while of course we want to highlight satellite capabilities, we are not obliged to focus on satellites only. We are also not obliged to focus on Copernicus only, because in the end, the usefulness of Copernicus also depends on the use of additional data sets where Copernicus has its limitations, and there's this also tip and queue paradigm where you use the free and open data of Copernicus, which is of course an asset, and to identify maybe a certain pattern, and only then maybe you go a bit deeper into your pockets and pay for a commercially available picture of a certain area of interest. And so you may have recognized a pattern kind of for free with free data, and then optimize your own analysis by focusing on that specific area. And there you might use drones, or you might use commercial satellite data, and this is nothing that we want to exclude, because we want to promote Earth observation as such in Europe, and the capabilities of European innovators to provide Earth observation solutions.
Okay.
And on all of these sensors that are described here repeatedly, like hyperspectral imagery, radar imagery, also a drone could be equipped with some of these sensors.
Okay, perfect. Well, I don't know the experience of Eva. Eva Haas, my colleague from the Marine. In my experience, using a drone in the maritime domain is very, 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 very challenging. So for monitoring crops, there might be some challenges, and I'm totally aware. For maritime domain surveillance, you need unmanned aircraft rather than drones, because
yes, you're right. So aerial imagery, I wouldn't want to exclude it as well. And then of course there are different types of sensors that would work in different types of environments. So here in a road, you can put in a sensor that can measure the frequency of its usage. You can put in sensors that can measure maybe water levels after rain, to measure certain things. While of course in the ocean, it wouldn't help to drop such a sensor, but you would put like a buoy that measures maybe wind speeds, wave height, whatever. So there will be very different solutions that would work in different sectors. Just as I mentioned before, satellite data doesn't help much with wind speeds on land, while it does have its applications on the ocean. And yes, while a drone can fly very close to the blade of a windmill or to a bridge to do certain inspections, on the ocean where there's a strong wind and which is also a large area, and the drone of course has only limited capacity with its battery to well, depending on the type of drone, of course, and how it's powered, there also don't see it. So indeed, for marine and maritime applications, we see a stronger need or stronger application field for satellites, depending on what you want to measure. Do you want to measure the water quality? Do you want to look at vessels? Do you want to look at algae? Do you want to map the migration of certain species? Depending on that, you need a certain resolution and a certain frequency, and maybe you need indeed also an airplane to fly over a certain area, because you need a higher resolution, because the objects of interest are maybe smaller. So, and then as you can see, these applications and technologies here, they repeat and repeat and repeat, and you might get bored if I read the text here. What I really want to bring close to you is why we chose this sector, and that there are examples of applications, and that there are more examples than those that are listed here. So what I want you to do is use this as a resource for your own presentations, maybe. What we can certainly do is provide also, as we should have access to it, further examples, better imagery, because from an image, an actor in a certain sector might already get an idea of what they see and what the capability is. And this is what these examples are meant to be, to tell you what is already there, and then to get those people thinking in what it could do for them. And I hope you, as somebody who speaks the language of the sector, maybe also already get thinking in what could work as a story and as a message, and what kind of what part of the story you would want to tell, and how much into detail you actually can go in telling them about the technical specs, or rather about the results it produces, such as these images. The next sector is the one of marine, and Natasha already introduced that we indeed have now split marine into marine and maritime. So we don't only look at like fishing, aquaculture, and water quality, but also on shipping and ice and offshore assets. Why did we choose marine? Because again, it's economically a very important sector. It feeds us. The waterways are important for the transportation of goods, and the oceans are also very important in terms of environment and biodiversity, and important part of the food chain in the end, also for all of us. And there are many potential applications already for Earth observation as regards the security aspects. So you can map vessels, also illegal vessels, then the water quality aspects, the biodiversity aspects, the fishing activities. And there are a number of projects that already confirm that this is there's an area of high interest also for Earth observation applications. To show you a few examples here that deal with measuring ice, measuring the water quality, measuring algae bloom in water, monitoring coastal water as well, and the erosion of the coast, or also water depth, which is important for shipping and the safety of ship navigation. To provide you with a few examples, and while I still have to update this presentation with images that are not licensed, this will be a resource available for you to look into it and to maybe reuse some of the information in your presentations. The challenges that we have identified here are insecurity. And I'm happy I found an icon of a pirate ship, which is something satellites can map. So you can map illegal vessels. Vessels can turn off their signal so that they are in principle invisible, but of course you can still take images of them from space and detect those vessels that at the same time turned off their signal, which is suspicious, which has aspects of security if it's maybe pirate ships or other types of illegal vessels, but can also be related to illegal fishing, where fish trawlers also try to be invisible when they do their activity. Then there are environmental concerns that can be tackled with the help of observation. So the cleanliness of the water is an issue, and also tracking those that are responsible for the maybe not cleanliness of it. And then there's lots of traffic on the oceans that can benefit from Earth observation, both in terms of monitoring wrongdoings, as well as optimizing navigation. So navigation is in principle the task of GNSS satellites, but Earth observation can still support finding a better route if there is maybe a shipwreck in the way, if there's ice in the way, if there's a certain weather conditions that prohibits to take a certain route, then Earth observation can jump in to optimize your routing as well. And you will find this also in the example applications that we have listed here for you. So as I said earlier, you can measure with different instruments of satellites the water quality. You can detect ships, vessels, you can detect oil spills, and you can, because you have time series of these images, track back to the ship that actually caused this oil spill. You can, this is the example I just gave you, optimize navigation in the case of certain events that you can measure with Earth observation satellites. You can measure the height or the depth of the water, and you can support also with weather data to again optimize ship routes to avoid bad weather areas. And it's the same instruments again and again and again that I don't want to bore you with, but they have different, always different flavors. So while in agriculture you use the hyperspectral imagery maybe to monitor your crops or the soil, you can also apply it to marine to monitor the ocean or the coast. And while radar imagery can be applied in agriculture again to monitor your crops, and in infrastructure to monitor ground movements, you can also apply it to the wind sector to measure wind speeds, and in marine they find again a different type of application. So these examples repeat and repeat, but they have always a different flavor, and also different types of in situ observations are true here than in the other sectors. So in situ data is always necessary to calibrate the data that in the end the satellites provide, because certain events are very local and more precise in combination with the satellite data. I do have the drones example here, but indeed this is probably just for coastal applications. So this is an example here on the image that takes water probes to measure the water quality, because we also do look at, well, we don't look at inland water, but at coastal water as well, where they might have an application. While in raw materials,
Nico,
and
I'm sorry
yeah,
for interrupting, but I think it's getting late and
yes,
people need coffee.
okay.
You need a bio break. So I don't know how you want to proceed.
Okay, I mean, this is the last sector.
Okay. So
Maybe
if,
I just limit myself maybe to mention why we chose it. The applications are similar, the technologies are similar, the challenges are similar. Or I can do it after a 5-minute coffee break. What do you say, Natasha?
what did you say? Because I didn't hear you, sorry.
Yeah, we can have a 5-minute coffee break, but it would be the last few slides anyway.
It's up to the team if they can carry on for more 5 minutes and then break a bit longer. Like not up to me. Let's see what the rest prefer.
Coffee sounds fantastic, but doesn't have to be long. So I'm.
Okay, no, it will not be long. So really, last sector. Why did we choose the raw materials sector? Because again, it is crucial for our economy. We do rely on raw materials. Some of them are not available and are very rare. And Earth observation has the potential to explore such raw materials also in our geographical area, and although one should think that these are the non-fake EO experts in working in the raw material sector, because you have the geologists there that explore with their instruments the areas of interest. It didn't have an uptake there, so it is although it has a high potential there, it is of great interest to convince this industry of the potential of observation. Therefore, the different elements in the value chain of raw materials, from exploration to the extraction of, let's say, minerals, and the monitoring of the sites. What we do focus on is really minerals and metals, and not oil and gas. And although satellites can also go a bit under the surface, which is also relevant for the raw material sectors, we don't focus on mining underground, but we will have certain limitations, of course, in what type of mining sites we can support. And the challenges that we see here is, again, the environmental footprint, because that's what we associate mining with. It uses often a lot of water that then afterwards is contaminated. It uses machinery, and it moves a lot of soil to get to the resources. So it does have a huge environmental footprint that needs to be monitored. There's the challenge of security of supply. So we depend on also importing lots of raw materials. Thus, it is of even higher importance to spot locations, maybe in our own geographical areas, and to identify alternative raw materials for certain applications. There are aspects such as the one of health and safety. So mining is very dangerous. It still requires actual people to do the work. You cannot automate everything, and as you move lots of soil, accidents can happen that need to be avoided. And again, there's the technological barrier. So there must be a reason why the geologists do not use predominantly satellite data or Earth observation data, but insist on traditional means of exploration and monitoring. And again, it is on us to convince them of the potential that Earth observation has also for their sector. And we see potential in the exploration as such to spot certain minerals, to to identify areas of interest, to plan the sites and the mine as such. And then while a mine is operating, we see application areas in the monitoring of the safety to predict and avoid where there's constant movement of soil, of course, through the mining activities. There can be also unintended movement. So a whole pile of soil can come down, which can be predicted if you apply the right techniques and analyze the ground movement, for example. You can monitor activities of mining operations, or here this is an example rather of the oil and gas industry that we don't focus on, but you can monitor how certain raw materials are also transported and how much is in stock. This is also the example of one of the projects here that focuses on the ATMM, that focuses on the flow of coal. Then there's the environmental impact that you can monitor as well, such as contamination of soil, then deforestation, and other activities linked to maybe also illegal mining that can be detected. And we see its application already in the permitting and then the licensing, because to really open a mine, you need to fulfill certain requirements. You have to ensure that no nearby facilities or natural habitat will be impacted by your activities, which can be supported again by means of Earth observation that can map nearby areas and underground conditions that would be in favor or against putting a mining site there. And we have again the same type of technologies that also support the mining sector that I will not repeat. We have one more.
No. We need a break.
Okay.
I meant for coffee break, not that you should rush, Nico, just to clarify. I just said a short break we'll do for coffee.
Okay, then let's have a coffee break.
Yeah, should we say 10 minutes so we meet again 4:10?
Okay.
Great.
Good.
Sounds good.
Yeah, see you in 10 minutes. Bye.
Okay, see you.
Thank you. Nico, you are the host, so stay.